President Donald Trump said on Thursday it would be very surprising for him not to declare a national emergency if he can make a deal with Democrats to pay for his promised border wall along the border of U.S. We have to get a win or I will declare a national emergency, he said to reporters before departing for McAllen, Texas and Mexico. Under the National Emergencies Act of 1976, the President has the authority to issue an emergency declaration using emergency powers contained in 123 statutory provisions, as calculated recently by the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law. What constitutes a national emergency? The statute does not provide any explicit criteria for what type of circumstances qualify as a national emergency, so discretion rests solely with the President. According to the Federal Register, 58 national emergencies have been declared since 1976 with 31 still in effect. Some continue export control regulations, enforce economic sanctions or address human rights abuses. Bush declared a national emergency 3 days after 9/11 that has been extended annually, including by President Trump. President George W. Jacqueline Martin. The President Donald Trump speaks to the media as he leaves the White House, January 10, 2019, en route for a trip to the border in Texas as the government shutdown continues. How does declaring a national emergency build and pay for the wall? By declaring a national emergency, the President could cite several different aspects of U.S. More, Trump visits southern border after saying he probably will declare emergency if no deal on wall. Trump could trigger part of Title 10 U.S. Code that he believes give him the authorization to build a wall. Code which states that under such circumstances the Department of Defense may undertake military construction projects not otherwise authorized by law that are necessary to support such use of the armed forces. It also explains that such projects may be undertaken only within the total amount of funds that have been appropriated for military construction, including funds appropriated for family housing, that have not been obligated. Daniel Ochoa. The Olza APTHE sun sets while people walk close to the border fence between the U.S. 2019. Side of San Diego, California, and Tijuana, in Mexico, Jan. Congressional aides have estimated that there are currently about $13 billion in unobligated funds for military construction and family housing, but $11 billion is already pegged to planned projects, meaning only $2 billion could be reprogrammed. At least one Republican congressional aide told ABC News that estimate could be higher, but the Department of Defense has not officially released the amount of unobligated funds it estimates could be used in the event that Title 10 is triggered. Title 33 allows for the Department of Defense to apply the resources of the Department of the Army's Civil Works program, including funds, personnel, and equipment, to construct or assist in the construction, operation, maintenance and repair of authorized civil works, military construction, and civil defense projects that are essential to the national defense. Congressional aides have estimated that there are currently about $13 billion in unobligated funds for military construction and family housing, but $11 billion is already pegged to planned projects, meaning only $2 billion could be reprogrammed. Some Republicans estimate that number could be higher, but the Department of Defense has not released the number of unobligated funds that could possibly be used. Trump could also use another section of Title 10 that supports counter-drug activities to justify the use of a national emergency. Section 284 authorizes the Secretary of Defense to provide support for the counter-drug activities or activities to counter transnational organized crime and construction of roads and fences and installation of lighting to block drug smuggling corridors across international boundaries of the United States. For any new border wall that would need to be built on existing farmland, Trump could cite a section of Title VII that states legal provisions intended to protect farmland do not apply to the acquisition or use of farmland for national defense purposes during a national emergency. And Title 42 gives him authority to displace landowners, since the provision that persons displaced by a federal project may not be required to leave their dwelling unless they have had a reasonable opportunity to relocate to a comparable replacement dwelling does not apply in the case of a national emergency declared by the President. What kind of pushback could the administration face? The act allows Congress to cancel the declared emergency by a resolution passed by both houses. Congress has never voted to revoke a declared national emergency. but even then that decision can be vetoed by the president. Susan Walsh, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of Calif. Center, speaks following a meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House, January 9, 2019. Some Democrats doubt whether Trump can legally redirect any of this money for the border wall because Congress codified restrictions on the types of barriers money can be used for and has not appropriated anything to be used explicitly for the construction of a wall on the southern border. Brookings Institution senior fellow William Galston anticipates several other avenues of pushback should the president declare a national emergency. The landowners whose property was seized to build the wall would have suffered a concrete injury that would entitle them to go to court. They could argue the president has not made the case that there's a national emergency. Gay app groups opposed to border walls being built along the Texas-Mexico border gather outside the McAllen International Airport as they wait for the arrival of President Donald Trump. Jan. The security conditions as they're currently being described by the administration didn't occur overnight. They've talked about these conditions for weeks and months. The timing of the emergency could also be called into question. 10, 2019, in McAllen, Texas. If it was an emergency several weeks ago, why wasn't the declaration made at that time? Asks John Cohen, a former acting assistant secretary at DHS and ABC News contributor. It raises questions about whether this is an actual emergency or a political strategy based on a disagreement over appropriations.